Now, one of the big stories, Ross referred to it earlier in the show, is the white farmers in South Africa who are being murdered and bludgeoned and tortured and raped. It is an absolute disgrace, driven by their own government. The ANC in power are pushing for the reclaiming of farms, and this is let rip all sorts of malevolent forces. We have two fantastic guests. I want to go straight to them, and I want to hear from both of them the full story. You are not going to want to miss this, despite, as Ross said earlier, the Sydney Morning Herald batting this away as some kind of alt-right nonsense that we needn't worry about. This is a hugely critical issue. We've got Andrew Hastie and Lauren Southern. Andrew Hastie, you will know, of course, as a backbencher in the Liberal government, former SAS officer. Andrew is fighting to have white South African farmers brought to Western Australia, where Andrew lives. And Lauren Southern has made a film, Farmland, about the plight of South Africans. Welcome, Lauren. Welcome, Andrew, to the show. Let's kick off, Lauren, with you. Just tell us briefly the plight, and we'll get into also your fight for the farmers of South Africa. Off you go.
Sure thing. So it's still shocking to me to hear people claim that what is going on in South Africa is some sort of alt-right conspiracy. It is something that you don't have to make up. It is demonstrably true. You can look at the statistics right now. White South Africans, at a far higher rate than other groups, specifically farmers, are being attacked, murdered in brutal ways that are beyond just robberies. And it not just by the people in South Africa, but they are under attack by their government. The ANC has now passed through a law saying they are going to be taking white land without compensation, which is completely against even what Nelson Mandela wanted for the country when he said we want more blacks to own land. And you have parties like the EFF, run by Julius Malema, who have 10% of the government, and they are saying we need to kill and shoot the Boer in songs they sing at their Congress meetings. Not only that, Julius Malema has said he plans on not killing whites just yet. This is a direct quote from the leader of a political party in South Africa. So to anyone saying that this is an alt-right conspiracy, this is ridiculous pro-white nonsense, if this were being said about any other racial group in the world by a political leader, it would be on the front page of every single newspaper, Huffington Post, Independent, New York Times. They would all be saying the rise of Hitler is upon us. But because Julius Malema is black, because the ANC are what seem to be, they're not a minority in their country. Remember, this is South Africa. Because this is supposed to be the Rainbow Nation, we ignore it. But it seems Australia has taken a different approach. And while I believe Australia is taking the right approach, considering taking in South African refugees, the world seems to be giving you heat.
So, Andrew, let's go. Thank you, Lauren. Let's go to Andrew. Tell us your thoughts on it. And is Lauren right? Are we doing enough?
Well, thanks, Rowan. We've always had a very generous humanitarian visa program. It's run for the last 4 decades. We've been very responsive to international crises. We've taken Vietnamese people, Lebanese people during the Civil War, Albanians, Bosnians, Serbians, Croats during the Yugoslav wars. More recently, just in 2015, we took 12,000 Syrian refugees, mainly minorities, Christian and Yazidi, which I was very, very supportive of. So in that context, we've always been very generous, and on that basis, that's why I'm advocating for the South African farmers, because I believe they do meet the criteria for refugee status, and that is being discriminated against or persecuted in their country of origin. Now, if we accept the facts that Lauren just outlined, and of course we've had reporting in our own media from Paul Toohey and others, there was something like 400 attacks last year, something like 80+ murders, and this year alone we've already had 15 murders. And I can tell you, I've also got anecdotal evidence in Western Australia, Rowan, of people who've been directly affected by this, people living in Canning and elsewhere. And that's why I'm advocating for it. It's very, very disappointing, however, that as soon as you raise this issue, people accuse you of being racist. And we saw Peter Dutton during the week, the Minister.
Yeah, Andrew, we'll get into that. I just want to quickly, so our viewers know, just some of the headlines. Farm manager tied upside down, hacked to death, wife raped. A farm manager was tied up with wire, repeatedly stabbed, hacked to death. His wife was raped by the attackers. Murder so brutal that they shocked even South Africa. A couple shot dead. The son then drowned in a scalding bath of hot water. We've had a young boy forced to watch his mum being repeatedly and violently sexually assaulted. These are all, you've had emails, Andrew, from farmers talking to you about genocide, talking to you about the need for help, the need for another country to help. This is all happening. Lauren, talk us through the actual experiences that are happening that you've heard about.
Yeah, I actually had the opportunity to speak to the woman who had to clean up the skin of the young boy who was boiled in that bathtub. And it's a group called the Blood Sisters. They used to just be two people who would go about and they would clean up these murders, these horrific murders where children were raped, families massacred. They've had to expand, basically, and make it a full business where they've got places all over South Africa with employees because these murders are happening at such exceptional rates. I thought it would be difficult to find people to interview for my documentary who had their families murdered, parents, whatever it may be, but instead the horrific things I found was I would meet one person and they would point to their neighbor there who had their mother's eyes gouged out, their neighbor there who had their children attacked, their neighbor there who was shot. It's shocking the amount of people who are affected by this, and it is not all recorded. In fact, if you look at these statistics, the government is recording a lot of these attacks not as the brutal murders that they are, but instead as robberies gone wrong. So this is another aspect of what could potentially become a genocide, is the people trying to cover it up. I'm not saying a genocide is happening. I'm not saying that a civil war is going to happen or anything. But the reason that we talk about these, the reason that our politicians address this issue is so that we avoid getting into that situation. And so we save people before things get to those extremes. And all of the signs seem to be there.
I hadn't actually really heard much about you before that this incident happened. And I just don't know what kind of country we're living in when somebody like Lauren can be refused entry under these terms while we are bringing ISIS fighters back from Syria. I believe the figure's about 400 that we know about. That are highly dangerous. And people want to bring them back and give them a council house and benefits and be nice to them so that they don't kill us. And somebody who has no evil intent whatsoever but just wants to exercise free speech is treated like a criminal. And of course what is kind of a semi-comedic about this is they drop you off at Calais. You know, you're a kind of refugee. We don't have many refugees going from Dover to Calais. It's normally the other way around. We have thousands trying to get from Calais to Dover. And we know, in my party, I've just appointed a new Home Affairs spokesman who's an ex-police officer who will tell you that people are landing in boats in the Norfolk coast. The police will not confront them because they know they're armed and dangerous. And people are flooding in. Now, if anybody tries to talk about that, not just that specific, but this whole issue around that, then they, of course, are demonised and called right-wing, etc., and we mustn't talk about it. And the reason we mustn't talk about it is the political establishment and the government are terrified of actually talking and speaking the truth about what is actually going on in our country.
Yeah, no, I agree. And Lauren was actually detained in Calais trying to enter the UK. She travelled from Flanders into Belgium, into France, completely unhindered. And she was speaking at the Vlaams Belang's youth conference, your party's conference.
Yeah, we were very proud and we thank you for it. That she was willing to speak for our youth department, and that's why as soon as we heard that the day after she was held in Calais in these circumstances, we sent out for a car to bring her within France or in the borders of France to Strasbourg, because this was too shameful, not only for the United Kingdom but for European democracies as a whole. And so if this hemicycle and if this parliament is a center of democracy, the case of Lauren and her adventures in the United Kingdom should be here on the table. That's why she's here. That's why we're so glad that she's here and so proud that she's able to express herself freely for the moment within this parliament.
What's interesting, we were having a conversation last night with the Canadian immigration minister, shadow immigration minister, and we were talking about freedom of speech and how the millennials now, really that their eyes are being opened to, they've had this liberal socialist education and their eyes are now being opened to actually what's going on out there. And I know that your youth conference, she had a standing ovation. They were so pleased that, there's somebody in Canada and across actually Europe and across the world.
She should express herself. We had a conference yesterday where I was Yeah, very happy to hear her explain. And I'll ask her to do it herself.
Sure.
How these youth, how these millennials discover now that they have been cheated by the authorities, by the mainstream media.
Yeah, what do you think, Lauren? What's your message to the European youth?
Right, we don't give millennials much of a chance. We kind of reject them as just being silly liberals who just want to watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians and rave all day. But the fact of the matter is that millennials don't reject nationalism or patriotism or conservative ideas because they hate them and they've genuinely thought about them. They've never actually even gotten the opportunity to reject ideas of nationalism because they've never been told them. The media won't interview people who have these opinions, or what happens is the ideas have been defined for them by the mainstream media, who only pick the worst representatives. They pick the worst quotes, and they try to make them seem like these scary, awful ideas. And of course, if you took any ideology and only chose the worst representatives of it to present, anyone would reject it. So what needs to happen is we simply need to give an opportunity for millennials to actually hear these ideas in their true and genuine definitions. And once that occurs with the alternative media, as we're seeing rise up in the United Kingdom, and the government is very afraid, which is why I assume bans are happening against alternative journalists, as you've seen with Vlaams Belang, once the youth hear these ideas, they are up in arms. They feel cheated. Exactly what you said. They feel cheated from the futures that they should, the history that they wish they had heard before, the being able to even just love themselves and their country. This is something that gives them a sense of identity and a sense of purpose. And you see so much unity among the Vlaams Belang youth movement, and I believe you will be seeing more of that across Europe as voices like your own speak up and represent them.
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And let's move on to South Africa. Subject very close to my heart. 2 months ago, we had Corné Mulder, an MP from the Freedom Plus Party, that came to present his thoughts on the election. The election's looming, it's 15 months' time. He predicts not just a Zimbabwe will happen, he actually predicts there's going to be a genocide on the scale of Rwanda. That's frightening. We talked about how we could help. I wrote to Boris Johnson and published my letter, I think, as part of the Commonwealth. We should be helping them. Gerard, what's your views on what's happening in South Africa?
This is about free speech, isn't it? And free speech is also about the media informing people what's going on in a free and fair manner. Now, I've been seeing more about what's going on in South Africa on Twitter than you'll ever see on the BBC or the ITV or Channel 4. And I was appalled to see, I believe it was the Home Affairs Minister in South Africa, and I can't remember his name, saying that they were going to throw white farmers off their land.
Well, he's actually the opposition. Julius Malema, who was kicked out of the ANC and has now got his own very frightening Marxist party called the European Economic Freedom Fighters.
Well, thank you for correcting me on that. But he was saying on this little clip that I saw that they were going to throw farmers off of their land and we were going to kill them, but not yet. Now, if that had been a politician in any European country saying something about black people or brown people, they would be demanding that he's arrested and hauled off to the International Court of The Hague. It doesn't even get reported on the BBC and the mainstream channels because we don't really have free speech in our country. We have what is permitted to be free speech. Now, I abhor violence wherever it comes from, whatever side it comes from. And can I just say a thing about, you were talking about millennials very quick because it ties into this. What's happened in our education system is you've had a relentless 40 years of left-wing propaganda. I don't regard myself as right-wing or left-wing. I regard myself as a patriot who wants to find pragmatic policies that are good for everybody in our country. And I'm very proud to be British, and I think everybody else should be proud of their country. Why not? They've got lots of things to be proud for all around the world.